In the winter of 847 CE, preparations begin for a wedding in Norse-controlled territory. A jarl's daughter will marry a powerful landowner's son, cementing an alliance between two influential families. The ceremony follows traditional customs, the exchange of ancestral swords, the binding of hands, the sharing of mead. But as evening approaches, something unusual occurs. The bride is led away not by her new husband, but by an elderly woman wearing a distinctive cloak. Historians have noticed something peculiar about Norse wedding descriptions in the Icelandic sagas. These medieval texts, written primarily by Christian scribes between the 12th and 14th centuries, contain numerous accounts of marriage ceremonies. Yet certain passages show clear signs of alteration: text scraped away, pages removed, margins marked with Latin phrases meaning forbidden or not to be repeated. The question is, what were these scribes trying to erase? Modern scholarship reveals a complex picture. The sagas were composed 200 to 300 years after the Viking Age ended. Written by Christian converts working in monasteries, these scribes faced a dilemma: preserve their cultural heritage while conforming to church doctrine. Archaeological evidence and comparative analysis suggest they chose to sanitize certain practices, particularly those involving pre-Christian religious rituals. Between 2016 and 2019, researchers at Uppsala University employed ultraviolet imaging technology to examine damaged saga manuscripts. This process revealed previously invisible text beneath scraping and erasures. In the Volsunga saga and several other sources, they discovered references to a figure called the bedding witness, someone who attended noble wedding nights in a ceremonial capacity. Multiple sagas mentioned this presence, yet none explained the role clearly. The term appears in at least 17 different texts from the saga literature. The medieval European custom did include verification witnesses for royal and noble weddings, but these typically remained outside the bridal chamber. The Norse references suggest something different: a participant, not merely an observer. Recovered text fragments describe this figure using terms associated with völvas, the female ritual specialists of Norse religion. Völvas practiced sia, a form of magic involving divination, fate-weaving, and communication with spiritual forces. In Norse cosmology, völvas held significant authority. They advised chieftains, predicted outcomes of battles, and performed ceremonies tied to fertility, prosperity, and protection. The connection between völvas and wedding rituals appears in sources beyond the sagas. The 10th century Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan documented a Viking funeral ceremony along the Volga River in 922 CE. His account describes an elderly woman he calls the Angel of Death who supervised ritual elements of the funeral. Ibn Fadlan mentions hearing of similar ceremonies at weddings, though he was not permitted to witness these directly. Archaeological discoveries have added physical evidence to the textual record. Excavations at high-status burial sites across Scandinavia have recovered small ceremonial blades, typically bronze or silver, distinct from practical tools or weapons. Chemical analysis of 17 such blades, conducted in 2018, detected traces of human blood alongside plant compounds, including those found in certain species of mushrooms used historically in ritual contexts. The most significant archaeological evidence emerged in 2019 near Siktuna, Sweden, once a major Viking Age trading center. Excavations in a forested area revealed 23 burial sites containing female remains. The graves showed no markers or conventional burial goods. Isotope analysis indicated that 21 of the 23 individuals originated from the British Isles, likely Ireland or Scotland. DNA evidence confirmed Celtic ancestry. The burial pattern raised immediate questions. Why were Celtic women buried in unmarked graves outside a Swedish settlement? Dating analysis placed the burials between approximately 830 and 950 CE. Spanning over a century of the Viking Age, the consistent presence of Celtic individuals suggested systematic rather than random circumstances. Skeletal analysis revealed trauma patterns consistent across the remains, evidence of complicated childbirth or related medical trauma. Forensic anthropologists determined that these women died during late pregnancy or childbirth. In 6 cases where preservation allowed DNA extraction, genetic analysis of fetal remains suggested fathers of Scandinavian rather than Celtic origin. The correlation between documented noble weddings in the Siktuna region and the timing of these burials proved statistically significant. Historical records indicate that for each high-status marriage within 50 kilometers of the site during this period, a corresponding burial appears at the location within days. The evidence suggests a practice involving pregnant enslaved women called rial in Old Norse and rituals connected to noble marriages. The exact nature of these rituals remains partially obscure, but the pattern indicates systematic ceremonial practices rather than random violence or individual crimes. To understand these findings, we must examine Viking Age beliefs about fertility, legitimacy, and social power. Norse society placed extraordinary importance on producing heirs, particularly for families holding land, titles, and political influence. A marriage that failed to produce children, especially sons, could dissolve alliances, undermine inheritance claims, and diminish family status across generations. Pre-Christian Norse religion emphasized the connection between human fertility and divine favor. Deities like Freya and Freya governed prosperity, abundance, and reproduction. Ritual practices aimed at securing their blessing formed an accepted part of religious life. However, some practices were more acceptable than others, even within Viking Age society. The völva's role in fertility rituals appears connected to seer magic, which Norse sources describe as involving altered states of consciousness, divination, and manipulation of fate. The English saga mentions that seer was considered so powerful and potentially dangerous that men who practiced it faced social stigma, though women could do so without dishonor. Evidence suggests that certain high-status families employed völvas to perform ceremonies intended to ensure successful marriages and healthy offspring. The recovered text fragments reference the ril's offering and the binding of fertility, suggesting ritual sacrifice played a role in these ceremonies. Viking Age society practiced slavery extensively. Raiders captured individuals during expeditions to the British Isles, particularly Ireland and Scotland, bringing them back to Scandinavian settlements as laborers and servants. Historical records from Irish monasteries document raids specifically targeting coastal settlements, with women of childbearing age among those taken. The archaeological evidence from Siktuna indicates that pregnant enslaved women were specifically selected for ritual purposes. This practice reflects beliefs about the transferability of fertility through ceremonial means, a concept found in various ancient cultures. The völva, acting as ritual specialist, would perform ceremonies believed to transfer the captive woman's fertility to the noble bride. The exact procedures remain partially uncertain due to limited sources, but the skeletal evidence, combined with text fragments and comparative religious studies, suggests ceremonies that proved fatal to the enslaved women involved. Estimates based on documented noble marriages during the relevant period suggest between 2,000 and 3,000 women may have died in such rituals across Scandinavia over approximately 150 years. This practice began declining rapidly in the late 10th century, corresponding with the Christianization of Scandinavia. When Norse rulers converted to Christianity, they faced pressure from the church to eliminate pre-Christian religious practices. King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, who ruled from 995 to 1000 CE, issued decrees banning various Norse rituals soon after his conversion. Interestingly, the fertility ritual appears to have been targeted for prohibition before even the famous sacrifices at Uppsala, Sweden's major pre-Christian religious center. This prioritization likely reflected both Christian moral objections and practical economic concerns. The practice required a constant supply of enslaved individuals, straining the labor force needed for agricultural work. Additionally, increased resistance in raided territories made capturing enslaved people more costly and dangerous. By the mid-11th century, the practice had essentially vanished. However, evidence suggests deliberate efforts to erase records of its existence. Analysis of saga manuscripts shows systematic tampering, with wedding-related passages disproportionately affected by removal and alteration. Over 200 manuscripts show signs of such editing. The motivation for this erasure likely involved multiple factors. Christian scribes found the practice incompatible with church teaching. Scandinavian communities, increasingly integrated into Christian Europe, may have wished to distance themselves from aspects of their past that could damage their reputation or legitimacy. The result was nearly successful historical amnesia lasting almost 1,000 years. Modern Scandinavian folk traditions preserve certain echoes of Viking Age customs, though significantly transformed. Some rural Swedish and Norwegian weddings include an elderly woman who stands with the bride, a custom called the bride's attendant in translation. Folklorists debate whether this represents a sanitized continuation of the völva witness tradition. Though the modern practice involves no ritual elements and serves purely symbolic purposes, the discovery of these practices raises broader questions about historical memory and selective preservation. What we know of the Viking Age comes largely from sources written by their descendants and former enemies, each with their own motivations for emphasis or omission. The sagas present a partially sanitized view, while Christian sources often exaggerated Viking brutality for political purposes. Contemporary scholarship strives to navigate between these extremes, using archaeological science, linguistic analysis, and comparative studies to reconstruct Viking Age society more accurately. The fertility ritual represents one of the darker aspects of that society, a practice that violated human dignity and reflected beliefs about power, status, and the commodification of enslaved people. Understanding such practices helps us appreciate both the complexity of historical societies and the importance of examining the past honestly, even when uncomfortable. The Celtic women buried at Siktuna and similar sites across Scandinavia deserve to be remembered not as anonymous victims but as individuals caught in circumstances beyond their control, whose deaths served purposes they did not choose and whose stories nearly vanished from history entirely.